Libby, it's just you and me.
Where is everybody?
I don't know, maybe I've been teaching this too many times.
Well,
So
you
far
did,
this year.
you did just teach it fairly recently.
I did. Last month.
I
I
was,
figured-
I was surprised.
Yeah, I figured we'd do it a couple times this year. In the first quarter, and then I'll let a month go by and then teach it. Hopefully, there's gonna be some revisions that are gonna come down the pike.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it should be in the next couple months.
Okay,
Minor.
great. Well, one thing, as long as it's just us for now anyway, I was thinking after this, that one that you helped me with, by the way, thank you so much for doing that, especially on a weekend. But I was thinking that maybe not for the general public, but more, I don't know, maybe the mentors or something, if we did a small meeting with, and picked 2 or 3 forms that are more difficult,
Sure.
kind of almost like a mastermind, but just to get some help. Like, I mean, that COP form shouldn't be that hard, but I really agonized over that darn thing.
Yeah, it's okay. You know what? I think that would be great. And if your fellow mentors want to do something, let's set up a time.
Okay, I'll take care of that. Even that darn, the other one that we went ahead and submitted with the offer, but was that sewer or that, I don't even know what the form was now.
Was it for the fire hazard?
No, it's not one of the normal ones. It was an amendment or whatever, because there's a well and a septic. That's what it was.
Oh, yeah, there's something, there's a
SWPI or something.
addendum for sewers.
Yes.
I
And
know
so we-
septic tanks.
Septics, yeah. So we filled it out like you saw, the best I could, and we submitted it. So we'll see what happens, but it makes me nervous. So anyway, I'll set that up.
Perfect. Sounds good. Let's give it about 2 more minutes and then we'll start.
Yeah, if it's only me, we don't really have to have the class.
No, there's more.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna mute then.
Okay.
And thank you, Mike, again.
You're quite welcome. Glad it worked out.
Yeah, we'll see if we get that into contract. We'll see. We submitted it.
Okay. We'll start in 1 minute, guys. Okay, hi, everyone. We'll get started right now and the stragglers will come in when they come in. So thanks for attending. We're going to be teaching the RPA, or the Residential Purchase Agreement, the one that was released late last December. So what I wanted to do is specifically open it up to, if you have any specific questions that you want to make sure that I cover it on the contract today and tomorrow, let me know. So does anyone have anything specifically that they want to make sure that I address today or tomorrow? Any specific questions? Yep. Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, just kind of go over overall. So if you don't mind, when I can ask you a question when you go along, so I'll be
Okay.
happy to kind of follow you up.
Fair enough. Fair
Cool.
enough. Okay. Anything else? Anybody else have anything? Okay, we'll be on this from till 3 o'clock. It says 3:30, but we'll be done by 3. So and then tomorrow is part 2 that also start at 1 o'clock. So without any further ado, I'm ready to get started on this. So this is the residential purchase agreement and escrow instructions that was first came out in December of last year. And we're going to go line by line. The first thing is that you have date prepared, and that's just a reference date. There's no legal significance for the date that you put down. It's just a reference date. You're gonna call the contract the California Real Estate Purchase Agreement dated, and whatever date you put in there is going to be the reference on that. 1A is this is an offer from, these are your buyers. So on zip forms, it allows for, I believe, 2 buyers. If you have more than 2 buyers that are buying it, for whatever reason, then you could do an additional signature addendum on that and add more buyers to the name. You could always type in an additional name, but the default, it's simplest with just the 2 names. Property to be acquired is, and that's where you put the address down. And if you, again, if it's in zip forms and you fill out the cover page, and it'll be auto-populated exactly how you have it in the cover, in the cover page. You could fill it in or type it in using zip forms. And this is where the first line would be the address. The second line would be, after in, would be the city. And the third line would be the county and the zip code. If you want to, you could add the APN number to that, which is, it's there for a reason. It's good to fill that in. The following says that the posting mailing address may be different from the city jurisdiction. I have a listing right now that it's on Bearden Drive in Los Gatos, but for the purposes of jurisdiction, it's in the city of Campbell. It just has a mailing address for Los Gatos. So you are going to find some houses like that. The mailing address is different than the city jurisdiction. So just be aware of that. And what I did is I put it in the MLS under private remarks that it is in the city of Campbell jurisdiction, but a Los Gatos mailing address. Any questions on page 1? I mean, paragraph 1. Okay, paragraph 2, I find the most discrepancies on, or the most mistakes that I find, and a lot of those mistakes is because something is left out. And if it's blank, it's an error. So this is confirming the agency relationship. And it divides into two different buyers and sellers representation. The top one is the blank is for the seller's brokerage firm, and you would fill in the company here and then the license number of the company. Below that would be the seller's agent and their DRE number as well. Third line, the buyer's brokerage company, their brokerage number. And the fourth line is the individual agent and the license number. In both the seller's brokerage firm and the buyer's brokerage firm, there is also a box that needs to be checked. Whether in the seller's brokerage firm, that seller's brokerage firm represents just the seller or represents both parties, buyer and seller. Same thing with the buyer's brokerage firm. Either it represents just the buyer or both the buyer and seller. And that's when you represent both the buyer and the seller, that's dual agency. Now, dual agency is not just you as an individual representing both the buyer and the seller. It also represents dual agency if you are the other party is in your own office. For example, if you're in Keller Williams Silicon Valley and there's another agent on the other side of the transaction, Keller Williams Silicon Valley, then it's dual agency. If one of you belongs to Gateway and the other person belongs to Silicon Valley, that is not dual agency. That is a representing just the buyer or just the seller. It's not both. So bottom line is whoever's in your office, that determines whether that's a dual agency or not. Of course, it's dual agency if you yourself as an individual represent both buyer and seller, but dual agency goes one step further because the DRE recognizes dual agency from the same office, from the same company. So a lot of the times I see that there is dual agency, but the boxes are checked for the buyer individually and for the seller individually. And also sometimes there's no checkbox, and that's the same as doing it wrong. So all these aspects need to be completed. All 4 lines, all 8 lines for license, DRE license number, and the 2 different boxes need to be checked. Any questions on that? That's majority of the mistakes that are made deals in paragraph 2B. Okay, then paragraph C is that sometimes we have multiple brokerages representing either the buyer or the seller. For instance, if you might have friends that you do a co-listing with, or you have a friend who's an agent that is helping you represent the buyer. In that case, there'd be 2 agents working on the property. And so this is where you would check the box if you have 2 agents representing buyer or representing the seller on that. Paragraph D, there's a automatically will be completed and filled out with your offer is possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. So that's just saying that Mr. Buyer, I'm going to be representing more than just you on in the market, and same thing, Mr. Seller, I'm going to represent more than just you on the market. It is not saying that I'm going to represent multiple buyers on one property, because it's really for the brokerage, and that the brokerage is going to represent more buyers or more sellers than just you. But individually, you have a fiduciary duty to represent your buyer on that one property. You can't legally have 2, you can't have fiduciary duty for 2 specific buyers on the same property. So sometimes that happens when you have an open house and you get multiple people wanting to write up an offer with you, you being the host of the property. My recommendation is you take one and you refer out the other. Okay, any questions on that? I'm gonna move on.
Question,
Paragraph,
Mike, just a quick one. In regard to brokerage, you mentioned both brokerage, is that has to be with the Kelly Williams, or can that be like maybe Redfin, for example, or something? No.
well, I'm not sure exactly what your question is, Frank, but there's not gonna be dual agency if it's with another company. If it's with another company, it's gonna be one's gonna represent the buyer, one's gonna represent the seller. Only when the both agents come from the same office will there be dual agency.
I see. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into paragraph 3. This is called the grid. And everything is a lot of it's filled out here. Everything is a summary of what this contract's gonna offer. Now, the important thing is you just can't just learn this paragraph 3, that you have to know the whole contract. But let's get started with paragraph 3 and talking about what what everything is that's filled out. Again, the contract went from 10 pages to 16 pages. So it's, the rest of this contract is just as important as paragraph 3, but it's a good reference place to check out. So 3A is the purchase price. This is where you put the purchase price amount in there. If you are going to get all cash and not a loan, you check the box under additional, you check the box under additional terms. Wait a second. Okay, there we go. Additional terms would be all cash if it's an all cash offer. Paragraph B is close of escrow. When is it going to close? Either you could put down the number of days after acceptance, or you could put a specific date down. I don't care. Either one works. Expiration of offer. Well, this buyer is writing up the offer. How long is it going to be out there? And how long is it going to be before the buyer wants to make sure that the offer expires? So the default is that it's going to be 3 days, 3 calendar days after the buyer's signature, or you can put a specific date and time. So the default is 3 days at 5 p.m. This offer will be expiring. Initial deposit amount, it's $, and then it will auto populate the percentage. Typically, we put in our offers 3%, and that's because of liquidated damages, and I'll get to that tomorrow. But typically, our offers now, because it is a seller's market, we like to see 3% in there as the initial deposit amount, and it needs to be in the additional terms, needs to be deposited by wire transfer within 3 days and 3 business days. We are finding that a lot of agents, especially listing agents, want that box checked and they want it in 1 day. So you have the deposit within 1 day and not 3 days. So I do that with my buyers. I'll be proactive and put down, check the box and put upon 1 business day. Any questions on that? Okay. D2, if there is an increased deposit, and if you put down the 3%, there's no need to do an increased deposit because the liquidated damages takes care of that. But if you're going to put down less in the initial deposit amount, say you put down 1%, which years and years ago, that was the norm. And then you would put down the increased deposit, you would check the box and put down the remaining 2% to get all 3% in escrow when the contingencies were removed. So if you look at the increased deposit, if there is going to be an increased deposit, you would check the box, put in the amount in the terms and conditions, and then when is it going to take place? And usually it takes place upon the removal of all contingencies. That's the default. Or you could check the box and put a certain date down. But again, you're not going to see increased deposit if the initial deposit is at 3%. Okay, E1, loan amount. So this talks about the first deed of trust. What is the amount going to be? And you put in a number in the dollar next to the dollar sign, and that could be any amount of the purchase price. Typically, when you're getting a loan, it's 80%. However, we've been seeing a lot more down payments than the 20% down. So you put in whatever number you want to put in here, and then you put down the second line is fixed rate or initial adjustable rate shall not be to exceed blank percent. Now, first off, this is kind of a built-in contingency, but it's only a built-in contingency if you have a loan contingency. If you do not have a loan contingency, you do not need to put any number here because it doesn't apply. So this is only really the protection for the buyer should there be a sudden movement on the financial terms before your buyer is able to lock in his loan amount. So say the interest rate now is say at 3.75, and you might want to put in there, if you're getting a loan contingency, you might want to put a number in there that there's a little bit of wiggle room, yet your buyer is still comfortable buying the house at that interest rate. And maybe that number could be 4%. Maybe there's no wiggle room and it's got to stay at 3.75. So that's the first initial contingency for the loan, saying it's not going to exceed that. Now, I want to make it clear that this only applies if there's a loan contingency for this transaction. If there's no loan contingency, this exceed number means nothing. Okay, do you guys understand what I'm saying there? Okay, all right, then after the interest rate, then the buyer to pay 0 points or up to a certain percentage of the loan amount. That's up to you and what your buyer wants to pay if he needs to for points. Again, means nothing if you waive your loan contingency. You don't need to put anything in here other than the loan amount, so that the seller can see what you're getting a loan for. And the third thing in this box is 17 days after acceptance. This is saying that the buyer will supply a list of repairs required per the lender to get a VA or FHA loan. So it's not saying anything more than that, other than that the list will be given to the seller. It doesn't say that the seller has to repair those, but it does say that the buyer has to give it to the seller. And in this thing here is what type of loan is it going to be? The default is that it's going to be conventional loan, but it could be checked here as to what other type of loans there's going to be, either FHA, VA, or seller financing, or a space for other. Okay. All right. So we talked about the first deed of trust. The first loan goes in here. If there's a second, then we would be talking in E2 what that is going to be. And again, that is going to be a different amount, different terms, because a second is different than a first. So this would be the second deed of trust, what the percentage is on that, whether it's going to be fixed rate or adjustable rate, not to exceed a certain number, and 0 points to a percentage of the loan amount. How many points is the buyer going to be paying? Again, only if you have a loan contingency, then this should be included. And then conventional, again, is it going to be conventional loan or seller financing loan? You're not going to have an FHA or VA loan with a second deed of trust on there. It'd be just a first. Okay. E3, occupation type. The default is that it's gonna be a primary, the buyers are gonna live in the property, or it could be a secondary or investment property. Those are the three options. Paragraph F will be auto-populated what the rest of the down payment's gonna be from your deposits and your loan amount should equal the down payment. And then the last line is the total purchase price, which should equal this number here in A, should be the total purchase price, and the total purchase price here is gonna be there. Any questions on page 1? Okay, and then buyers and sellers sign the bottom of the page. Okay, page 2. If there's gonna be a seller credit to the buyer, it is in here. And it would be the amount that would be credited from the seller to the buyer. And the default is on the additional terms that the credits to be applied to closing costs. Now, we're gonna get tomorrow when we get to paragraph 5E, it's gonna say that the limit of seller's credits to the buyer is gonna be a lender limit. You could, the lender will approve up to a certain amount. Anything above that is not allowed to be transferred from the seller to the buyer. So if that is the case, say the seller's crediting $20,000 for closing costs and the actual closing costs are only $12,000, that is all the seller is going to be giving the buyer for credit will be what the lender allows, which would be $12,000. The other $8,000 goes away. The buyer is not entitled to the $8,000 that the seller was giving per the credit. The credit's going to be limited to what the lender allows, and the buyer is not to get any other credits other than what is allowable by the lender. Paragraph G2 is any additional financing terms. H1, H2, and H3 are all verifications. So the first one, the verification of all cash, that's if you're making an all cash offer, that it's going to be attached, proof is going to be attached with the offer. Same thing with verification of down payment and closing costs. If you're getting a loan, you still have to have down payment and you have to have closing costs. So that needs to be verified. And that again is as the default is that it's going to be attached to the purchase contract. Paragraph 3, H3 SB, I'm sorry, 6B is the verification of loan application. So that also is going to be attached to the offer, and it's going to, and in additional terms, you're gonna see, is it a pre-qualification letter, pre-approval letter, or a fully underwritten pre-approval? And you check the box in accordance with what you have. Now, the difficulty with this is that all three terms, there's no law as to what is what. So I could be calling it a pre-approval. Somebody else could be calling it a pre-qual. So you have to kind of dig deep a little bit and make sure what you have. And your lender should be able to help you out with that, whether it's actually a pre-qualification, pre-approval, or fully underwritten pre-approval. Any questions on paragraph after H3? Okay. Paragraph I is intentionally left blank. The reason that's left blank is that it could look like a 1, so they didn't want to confuse anybody. J and K. J is the walkthrough. One of the big differences between the walkthrough with this new contract versus the walkthrough with the previous contract is before it would say that up to 5 days prior to CEO or close of escrow. This one says 5 days. So it's exact. 5 days before close of escrow, you're allowed to do a walkthrough. It makes no mention of day 4, day 3, day 2, or day 1. It's just day 5. So if there's going to be any change to that, you need to negotiate that in. Paragraph K is different in that it's a assignment request. The rule was in the previous contract that the buyer was allowed to assign the contract to someone else, and that the seller cannot unreasonably withhold approval. In this case, you have 17 days to assign it to someone else. And after 17 days, the seller does not have to approve the assignment. So that's a big difference, is that in the first 17 days, you can assign it, and the seller cannot not unreasonably withdraw the approval. But now, after 17 days comes and goes after acceptance, the seller does not have to accept that assignment. That's a big difference, guys. So anyway, any questions on that? Okay, paragraph L talks about all the contingencies. They're all in one place. And if you look in the middle column, they're all 17 days long. Okay, in the old contract, we used to have a multitude of different days, 21, 17, everything like that. So now it's all 17 days. So L1, first of all, the loan, the contingencies for 17 days, or you can put down whatever you want here, or you can check the box saying no loan contingency. It's up to you. Same thing applies for the appraisal. What they have in here now is that the appraisal contingency shall be based on an appraised value or a minimum of the purchase price. I'm sorry. Either the appraisal contingency is based on the appraised value at the purchase price or more, or check the box and put a different number in. Now, the benefit of this putting a different number in is that, say your buyer's got an extra 100 grand that he could put towards the offer. If you make an offer for $1 million and you have an appraisal contingency, that appraiser needs to come in at $1 million. But if I had an extra $100,000 to put towards the deal, I only care that the appraisal comes in at 900, because I'm going to be putting in more. I'm willing to put in more down payment. So I'm going to check the box and I'm going to put $900,000. Is $900,000 easier to get for an appraisal than $1 million? Absolutely. So it's a little bit more of an advantage than not having an appraisal contingency. Not as good as not having an appraisal contingency, but it's within the buyer's ability to still buy the property, even if it doesn't appraise at the purchase price. So that's an option for you right now in 8B, to be able to put a lower number down if your buyer is willing to put more money than the 20% of the appraised value. Okay, the default again is if you're going to have the appraisal contingency, the days are 17 days. Their third option is under other terms, you could check this box and have no appraisal contingency. Now, I caution you, if your buyer is putting every single dime they have for the 20% down payment of $1 million, all they have is 200,000, or that's the most they have, and the appraisal comes in at 900,000, they're only going to get instead of $800,000 loan on a 20% down, they're only going to come in with $720,000. So it's going to be a problem coming up with the other money to make this deal. So you got to be real careful whether you have an appraisal contingency or not. So in this case, my buyer has plenty of down payment. I'm not worried about the appraisal. I'm going to check the box, no appraisal contingency. Now, with that, it doesn't matter if it's a FHA loan, or in this case, Removal of appraisal contingency does not eliminate appraisal cancellation rights in the FVAC. So if it's a VA loan, they, even if you check no contingency, you have a loan contingency automatic with the VA, and you can get your deposit back if the price does not appraise. It's a built-in protection for the buyer in that type of loan. It's built in whether the buyer wants to waive it or not. It's the buyer's right to keep a appraisal contingency in there. Any questions on that? Any questions on getting the loan? No loan contingency or loan contingency, same with appraisal. 17 days, no appraisal contingency, or a contingency for a lower a lower amount than what the purchase price has to offer. Gives you flexibility in L2, 8B as to how the appraisal contingency is going to work. After those two appraisals, after those two contingencies, the appraisal and loan, the next one is the investigation of the property, review of the seller documents. Those are the disclosures, the preliminary title report, the HOA documents, and then the review of leased or lien property, such as a solar panel. So all these other contingencies are 17 days, unless you want to change it to reflect a certain amount of days, or you're checking a box CR attached, and on the contingency removal, you're removing any and all these contingencies. Let's go back up to investigation of property. 17 days to do your investigations, and or the buyer has a right to get into the property for the first 17 days. And it's not a contingency. So you could remove your investigation of the property, but you still have 17 days to have the buyer to get access to the property for any reason that they want. It doesn't allow them to cancel the contract, but allows them to get into the property for 17 days. And what does a buyer do? Maybe he wants to have a contractor go through. Maybe he wants to get some bids on painting or remodeling or whatever. Maybe he just wants to take measurements so that they can decide where the baby grand piano is going to be. This gives you 17 days to get into the property no matter what. Okay. Okay, so we talked about this, the seller disclosures. That's 17 days or whatever you want to put here, or you're removing that. Preliminary title report, 17 days or whatever you want to put in here, or removing that. And then the HOA disclosure, 17 days or whatever you put here, or you're removing that. And the last item is the solar or leased or liened items, 17 days, put a number here or remove that. Okay. Paragraph L8, the last contingency is if the buyer has to sell a property in order to buy this property that they're running an offer on. And that will be a whole separate class that we're going to do on the COP addendum. Okay. Are you guys with me still? All right. Paragraph M1 is time of possession. So when is the buyer going to get possession of the property? So it's typically used to be typically 6 p.m. But now they put in the default is here is a notice of recording. So sometimes that could be 11 o'clock in the morning, could be 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But the time of possession, if you don't touch it, is going to be when the notice of recording takes place. You could always change the time to whatever you want. But I like the notice of recording. Okay. Seller occupied or vacant units. So that's the date of recording. And the date of recording, if it's gonna be, the default is close of escrow. Or if it's not close of escrow and it's gonna be after that, depends what it's gonna be, 29 days or fewer or 30 days or more. Why the difference here between the two? Come on, guys, I want someone to answer that question. All right, you guys are being shy on me. Okay, so if it's gonna be 29 days or fewer, you check the box. Or if it's gonna be 30 days or more, you check the box. What determines the number of days also determines what is gonna be the form that's used. The SIP form is for 29 days or sooner, and the RLAS is for 30 days or more. It's just purely based on the occupancy length. 29 page, the SIP is a real short version compared to the RLAS is a 5 or 6 page version. And that'll determine the seller occupancy. The third item is if it's gonna be tenant occupied. If it is tenant occupied at the time of the sale, you need to fill out the TOPA and check the box, and that will be accompanying the offer. Now, the TOPA, it doesn't matter. It doesn't say when the tenant's moving out. It just says at the time that the property is for sale, and with the offer presentation, there's a tenant occupied property, that TOPA needs to go with the offer. Doesn't matter if the tenant is moving out or not. Depending on the day that the offer is written, if the tenant is occupying the property at the time the offer is written, there needs to be a TOPA form with that. Okay. And I'll do a separate class with the COP as well as the TOPA. Okay. These are now seller needs to do this within these timeframes. So it doesn't say who's paying for it, just says that who's going to be doing, the seller's going to be doing this. So the first item, N1, seller delivery of documents, that's saying within the 7 days from acceptance, the seller shall deliver all the documents associated with the sale and disclosures to the buyer. Within 5 days after receipt, that the seller is going to sign the escrow holder provisions and the instructions. And then within 3 days after acceptance, the seller is going to pay the fees for ordering the HOA docs. And the last two items, the N4 is making sure that the smoke alarm and the carbon monoxide detectors and the water heater bracing is properly done. And the seller has 7 days after acceptance to complete that item. The last one, N5, is just a evidence of representative authority. And that is if someone is signing on behalf of a trust or a estate or something like that, it needs to have the representative authority paper signed. So usually that's done before with the listing anyway, but it needs to be done with the sale as well. So those were the timeframes that the seller has to live with to get done. O is left back because it looks like a 0. Any questions on that? Okay. P1, this talks about all the all the items that are going to be included in the sale. And P2 would be anything that's not included in the sale. There's only one check box that it automatically happens with all the contracts, and that is the bathroom mirrors are always included in the sale. And again, if there's a bathroom mirror that is not included, you would put that in under P2. But there used to be a problem when the seller has a hanging bathroom mirror. They consider that a picture, and the buyer is considering that as part of the bathroom. So it got into usually many examples of issues between the buyer and the seller over bathroom mirrors. So that's why it's automatically checked as included in the sale of the property. But you can see the list here from refrigerators, wine refrigerators, stoves, ovens, dishwasher, dryer, microwave, everything in there would be a buyer would either include or not check the box. Okay. All right, let's talk about allocation of costs. So for allocation of costs, we have the first one, Q1, is the natural hazard disclosure report. And that's, I think, like $125, $130. And that's the item description. To the right of it is who's going to be paying for it. So it's either a buyer or the seller or both. Now, both means that it's split equally between buyer and seller. Traditionally, that's a seller cost. And then there's additional terms if you want environmental or anything else associated with the natural hazard zone disclosure, you would check the box. Paragraph 2 and 3 are blanks for additional reports. You don't have to put anything in as a buyer. You are entitled to get any and all reports that you want to get. And again, it would be a buyer cost or a seller cost, depending on who ordered the reports. I don't like to put anything in the reports because I don't want the lender to be requesting those reports because it's in the contract. Paragraph 4. We talked about within 7 days that the seller is going to get it done. We never talked about who's going to pay for it. So this is where not only is who's going to get it done within the time frame. This paragraph Q4 talks about who's paying for it. Typically seller. 5 is government required point of sale inspections and reports. Typically that's a seller. And then if there's actions that are needed, who's going to be paying for that? Typically seller. Escrow fees, depending on the county. If it's in Santa Clara County, it's usually a seller pay. If it's in different counties, the best way to look it up as to who pays what is to go to your favorite title and escrow company and look at customary costs. And you'll see who pays for the escrow fees, owner's title policy. The lender title policy is the buyer because the buyer's lender is requiring it. The county transfer tax, typically it's a seller, but it's negotiable. Look up what the standard of practice is for that county. Santa Clara County, it's a seller pay. City transfer tax, usually it's split 50-50 between buyer and seller. HOA fee for preparing the documents, that's a seller pay. And the certification fee that the lender requires, that's typically a buyer fee. The transfer fee is negotiable. Either buyer, seller, or both. And private transfer fees is the default is that's the seller. And, again, anything can be negotiated, but but I like to do what's customary in the county. 16 and 17 are left blank. And then paragraph 18 is a little different. It gives a home warranty plan. That's the that's the 1 year insurance on the components of the house. So dishwasher goes bad, for a $75 deductible, they either repair or replace. Same thing with a whole bunch of things in the house. So here what it does is either spells out who's paying for it, either the buyer, the seller, it's split, or the buyer waives the home warranty plan. Nowhere in there does it say that the agent is paying for it. You can have that if you want, but it has to be separate from this paragraph. This paragraph 18 is either you're going to put buyer, seller, both, or waive. Those are your options. And then the cost is not to exceed a dollar amount and issued by buyer's choice or whatever company that you want. Used to be that you would order the report on the contract based on what upgrades you're doing. Here, it's not asking for upgrades. Here's just saying what's the total dollar amount going to be. You could always have it after you're accepted. You could always put that the buyer waives the home warranty plan in the contract, but then you as a buyer's agent could order it and pay for it if you want. I'm not saying that's the thing to do. I'm just saying that that's if you wanted if you wanted to pay for a buyer's home warranty, that's the way to do it, is waiving it and then doing it after the fact. And in paragraph R is other terms. Any questions on page 3 at all? Anybody have any questions on that? Okay. I'm going to page 4. So this is paragraph 4 is all the addendums, advisories, and everything that is found here. Now, addendums are part of the contract. Advisories are not to be part of the contract. They're just, as they say, advisories. So let's look at the addendums first. So paragraph 4A, we have a probate agreement addendum. We have a manufactured home purchase addendum. These two boxes are replacing what used to be separate contracts, purchase agreements. Now it's incorporated in this one purchase agreement with the necessary addendum with it. Probate addendum, manufactured home addendum, tenant occupied property addendum, which is the TOPA that we'll talk about in another class. And then if you're buying the house under tenancy in common purchase addendum, which is rare, but there are a couple of tenancy in common, especially up in San Francisco. Same thing with stock cooperatives. Rarely are you going to see in selling property a stock cooperative or a tenancy in common ownerships, but they do exist, but they're very rare down in this county. The two more that you'll see would be the probate agreement purchase addendum and the manufactured home purchase addendum. There is another addendum, and I don't see it here. A new construction addendum. There's a contract for new construction, and I'm talking about usually the one-offs that are just one property, not something like Toll Brothers that has 300 units, because they usually use their own contract, and you're considered a referral, getting a referral agreement instead of commission. But if you're part of the transaction and you represent a seller building a brand new house, you need to use a new construction contract, or this RPA with a new construction addendum. You gotta have that because it's got verbiage in there that protects the buyer, that you need to have that new construction as part of the paperwork. But anyway, let's go back up to other addendum. Paragraph B would be our basic blank addendum. And you would fill it in under 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, how many you also have. Paragraph B would be backup addendum, backup offer addendum. The septic well and property monument and propane addendum, which is important if you're selling a house with a well and septic. There's 2 exchange addendums, buyer intent to exchange or seller intent to exchange. And that's got good verbiage that I like better than saying a buyer to cooperate or seller to cooperate on 1031. Use these forms. They're better than what we could come up with. And then we're not seeing too many of them, but a short sale addendum and then the court confirmation addendum. Those are other addendums that are made part of the contract. Paragraph C is advisories. And if it was up to me, I not only would have these 4 advisories checked, I would have a 5th one, which is a statewide buyer and seller advisory checked, and include that in your contract. I think it's a real important form. And then in addition, these other ones are wildlife disaster advisory, wildfire disaster advisory, trust advisory, REO advisory, short sale advisory, and probate advisory. So you would check these boxes if it refers to your contract. If you're doing a probate, then not only do you have the probate agreement addendum, you also have a probate advisory. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, additional terms affecting the purchase price. So the first thing is that the buyer is saying that he's got the funds for his initial deposit that are going to be good when he deposits in escrow. And then it talks about the rest of the things that we talked about in paragraph 3, that that delivery will be by wire transfer, and that if there's an increased deposit, they'll use the form DID, which used to be called RID, the receipt for increased deposit. That form needs to be used with the additional deposit to make that deposit part of liquidated damages. So the example I gave earlier, 1% would be the initial deposit, and then the 2% would be when they would remove their loan contingency. They would increase their or whatever contingencies, they would increase another 2%, but they'd have that DID form with it to make it a 3% deposit for liquidated damages. Retention of deposit. This is if there is a buyer's default, in other words, he removed all his contingencies and he can't perform, that is called a default. And it's not that it's guaranteed that the seller is going to get the buyer's deposit. We need to go through liquidated damages if that's initialed, and see it's basically negotiable, but it could go through all the way to court to determine who gets the deposit. So it's not guaranteed that 3% is automatically going to go to the seller. We need to talk about whether there's a loss that the seller has received as a result of the breach of contract by the buyer, and a whole bunch of other things in there. But it is one remedy, is that deposit is at risk should the buyer default on the contract. And I'll talk a little bit more about it with liquidated damages tomorrow. All cash offer. Again, you need to provide proof that the buyer is able to buy the property with the cash, and it's not a contingency of the buyer getting a loan on this. Let's see what else. So you just got it. The default is we like to see it with the presentation of the offer, like I talked about earlier, that the buyer showing is cash. Loans. The loan is for conventional financing. That's the default, unless something else is checked. There's the seller has the right to contact the buyer's lender, or seller's agent has the right to contact the buyer's lender to get an update on what's going on with the loan process. That was added, which wasn't in the old contract. It gives the right for the seller or agent to just contact the buyer's agent for a status report. Balance of the purchase price, and then we talked about the limits on credits to the buyer. So I talked about that it shall not exceed what the lender allows, and that will be the limit on the amount. Also, I mentioned that $20,000 credit, and if the lender only gives $12,000 of buyer's costs, then that's all that they're able to get, and there's no hidden money sales or deposits made. It's the limit of what the closing costs would be to the buyer. Addition verification of down payment and closing costs. That's the second thing that needs to take place, that giving the seller that information. So we already talked about if it's an all cash deal, if it's a down payment and closing costs. And then the third version is that what type of loan qualification does the buyer have, whether it's the pre-qual, the pre-approval, or fully underwritten, subject to just getting the property. Those are the three types of verifications that we have. Paragraph C is buyer stated financing. And that the seller's relying on the buyer's representation of what he puts in paragraph 3 as to what type of loan that they're going to get, and the amount of down payment, whether it's contingent or non-contingent, everything there. So it's what the buyer is stating for the financing. That's what the seller is going to go off of. So in other words, if the buyer is putting down, he's getting a loan of 70, let's put it 75%, 25% down, and he winds up going for a 90% loan, and he's got a loan contingency. But in the offer, he's saying he's going to put 25% down, and he changes his mind, and he's only going to put 10% down and doesn't get the loan. So now he wants out of the contract, but he's saying he had a loan contingency. Well, that loan contingency was for the 25% down, not the 10% down. So if you have a loan contingency, it is only good for the loan that you have in the contract, not anything else that's been changed. So that's important. If we're talking loan contingencies, it is only earmarked for the type of loan that you are asking for in the purchase agreement. Any questions on that? Okay, closing in possession. Again, this takes place about that the buyer intends to occupy the property as indicated in paragraph 3E. The important thing is, who cares about how the occupancy is going to be? Do we really care? We don't care about it. The lender cares about it. Why? Different risks. And you see it today as we speak about what a second home rate is compared to primary residence. There's a big difference between in interest rates between a primary residence and a secondary home residence. Why? Well, because there's more risk with the secondary home. If I only have enough money to pay a mortgage, I'm probably going to pay on the house that I'm living in, not my second home. So no one cares about who puts that down as to what the occupancy is going to be, except the lender. So paragraph B, condition of property on closing. So this is just like the old contract. It's saying that the property is going to be delivered to the buyer in the same condition as what it was when they entered into a contract 30 days ago. So that sparkling pool that was beautiful in color and sparkling and all that, that now is a green water that's slimy and everything else, needs to be brought back to that condition of being a sparkling pool. The holes in the wall that weren't there when you made the offer, they need to be repaired. Everything per the contract needs to be, the conditional home needs to be when they first went under contract. The other thing is in this paragraph is that all debris and personal property shall be removed prior to close of escrow. So that's another thing. If there's any doubt and you're a buyer and it's all full of junk, you could reiterate saying that as per paragraph 7B, all personal debris and personal property shall be removed. If you want to emphasize something like that. Sometimes agents get in confusion saying, well, this is as is. And yet it says all debris and personal property not included in the sale shall be removed. So if you are concerned about that, please reiterate it again into other terms and conditions. Delivered as is not the same as removing all debris and personal property. Two separate issues. Okay, paragraph 2 talks about buyer, get your head out of the sand, conduct all investigations of the property in order to feel like you want to continue to buy the property. Okay. Seller remaining in possession after close of escrow. Now, we talked about it. We talked about the SIP agreement and we talked about the RLAS agreement. And one is for 29 days or less. The other one's for 30 days or more. So if you're scheduled to close escrow on a Friday and the seller agent calls you up and says, hey, our movers are stuck in Denver in snow and we can't move out until Saturday, what do you have? Seller's not moving out till Saturday. You have a seller in possession after close of escrow. I don't care if it's for one day, it's still sellers in possession. They're not moving out the day of close of escrow. What does that alert you to? What do you need to do? What do we need, guys?
An addendum or an SIP?
We need an SIP. The addendum is okay, but you need that SIP verbiage in there.
Top.
Okay, so you need both if you want. I'm okay without the addendum, but you need the SIP. And that's for how many days? The SIP is for how many days or less?
29.
And if it's 30, what do you need?
RLAS.
It's two separate forms, and one is not to be used for the other. Good. Okay.
Hey,
Let's
Mike.
talk. Yeah.
Quick question. What happens if you do a 59-day rent back and then the seller has that same issue in Denver where they're caught in snow?
Yeah, I would have a separate agreement. The reason why it's 60 days or less.
I know the lender.
Most lenders think that it's a rental property if it's more than 60 days. in this case, I'm gonna get an extension. I'm gonna get an agreement that the RLAS is to be extended for 5 more days. I'm not gonna send it to the lender. I'm just gonna have an agreement between the buyer and the seller that things happen. And
Yeah, that'd be fine.
things could happen. I'm more concerned about having something written, having something in writing, allowing the seller to stay in there for only 5 more days.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Okay. Paragraph D is that any assignable, any rights or warranties associated with the property could be that 40-year roof warranty. The dishwasher that's brand new maybe has a 1-year warranty. Everything is going to be transferred to the buyer in terms of warranties. Whether or not it's transferable, I don't know. I don't care. Here you go, Mr. Buyer. Good luck with you. So that's what we're going to do here. Also, at close of escrow, a seller is going to give all the keys to all the locks, is going to give the garage door openers, going to give you the codes to the security. You can read that contract in paragraph E. The codes to the alarm security systems, everything like that. As well as any internet connected device, such as my thermostat is a device that is connected through the internet. So that's what the buyer's going to be getting, and it's all in there as to what the seller needs to give to the buyer, including if there's keys. It says keys to all the locks. And if it's not to all the locks, either you need to address it in a counter offer, or the seller's got to get a locksmith out there to get keys for all the locks that the seller is committing to in this paragraph E. Usually that, I haven't used that side garage door, man door in 30 years. I don't know where the lock is. Well, if you sign this agreement, you've committed to produce a key for that lock. Paragraph 8. This is where you've done the contingency removal of all those items that are in paragraph 3 in the grid. Everything is 17 days. If you waive those contingencies, you need to do it on the attached contingency removal form. You don't need a contingency removal form for the loan or the appraisal, because it says that specifically in paragraph 3 in the contract. You need the contingency removal form for all the other contingencies. And just for the hell of it, just so that I don't have to convince the buyer's agent or seller's agent that I'm working with, if I'm representing the buyer, I will remove that contingency in the contingency removal as well, just so that there's no confusion. So I'm going to remove the loan and appraisal contingency, even though I already did that in the offer. Okay. Part of the contingency removal, this says it in a couple places, investigate the insurability of the property. It's not easy in some areas to get fire insurance. And if it is easy to get, it's a ton of money. So investigate that as early as possible in the transaction. I mean, back in the day, in the 90s, I would call the insurance company the day before close of escrow and say, hey, I need to have insurance on this property. And then it would be done and would be set. Now it's a lot more involved. So make sure that's part of your buyer consultation, is to when they see a property, is to make sure that you can get insurance on it. Paragraph Paragraph 4, just is making sure that there's a separation between appraisal and loan. In the old contract, it wasn't as, well, old contract, they would be lumped together and people would cancel the transaction because it didn't appraise, but only because they couldn't get their loan for that amount of money. And it's two separate contingencies. One is for getting the loan approval and the other one is for the appraisal to come in at a certain value. And you can get one without the other, but they're two separate contingencies. So just because a house doesn't appraise, you have a loan contingency, that's not going to get you out of the deal. You need to have an appraisal contingency for strictly the appraisal. And the loan contingency is for obtaining a loan. Didn't say how much, it just said getting a loan, because the appraisal is going to dictate how much of the amount the loan is going to be. Okay, so it's real important that you guys know two separate contingencies that stand alone: loan contingency, appraisal contingency. Investigation of property. This talks about that everything in the everything that the buyer shall be investigating is covered in paragraph 12. And it talks about, if it's on a hillside, should you get a soils report? Should you get, besides your pest inspection, should you get a well report, septic inspection? Everything that you can think of, depending on that is unique to the property, needs to be identified and reviewed. Paragraph D is the HOA. I'm sorry. Paragraph D is the seller disclosures. And there's a separate contingency for that. Title has separate contingency for that. The HOA contingency. And the last one is is if it's a leased or liened items, the biggest one being solar. And it's important that if it's a lease on the solar, either it's going to be assumed by the buyer or it's going to be paid off at close of escrow, one or the other. You don't have the option of a buyer just saying, I don't want the solar lease, and the seller selling it to the buyer, not addressing the lien on the property. Needs to be addressed. Any questions on leases of solar? Any questions on the other contingencies? Okay, paragraph H is kind of a CYA, is that the just because a buyer gets the seller's disclosures and the reports doesn't mean that they still might want to have a contingency to make that review. And if the buyer removes the contingencies, it is against the agent's advice. Now, we know that buyers are waiving contingencies left and right. Doesn't mean that it's right, but we have a fiduciary need to let the buyer know that it shouldn't be done. Now, what's going to happen is the buyer is going to lose out for the next 4 or 5 transactions doing it that way, and they're going to want to go in with no contingencies. It's still our fiduciary duty to make sure that we protect the buyer in that ability, especially if there's some red flags regarding the condition of the home, regarding appraisal. And hopefully the loan contingency is not a problem because they've already pre-approved for it and they're fully underwritten. Okay. Where did I leave off? Okay, and the last contingency is the sale of the buyer's property. That's that COP agreement, and that's almost a separate class on that Libby and I were talking about that we're gonna have a COP class on. But that could be the other contingency on this contract. Okay, any questions on contingencies? What's your experience? Are you seeing any deals get done with contingencies these days? Any of you guys writing offers with contingencies and having any success? Okay,
I just had this is Shirley. I just had a condo under $600,000 go into contract with a finance contingency.
Okay.
And I'm writing an offer today on a property with a property contingency because we want the foundation inspected.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to work, but I feel safer doing this.
Well, I think that I think that's the right way to go on that. It would have been nice if the seller's agent saw their own inspection and it called out for further inspection by I imagine it called out for further inspection by a licensed contractor in foundation work.
They did not. We're going to.
I get that, but
Yeah.
but it would have been nice if the seller did the extra, went the extra mile just to satisfy that concern that I'm sure other buyers have also.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's prudent. Okay, let's get on paragraph 9. Items included and excluded from the sale. So we already talked about that in paragraph 3, the grid about what's being checked. And the only thing being checked in there is the mirrors in the bathroom. Those are being checked so that there's no concern whether the mirror is fully affixed to the wall or is hanging like a picture. Either way, that mirror in the bathroom is staying with the property, unless there's some negotiations on that. Paragraph B is what's included in the sale. Again, it talks about, you can look in paragraph 2, all the B2, all the things that awnings, shutters, window coverings, satellite dishes, floor coverings, where they went into greater detail on this contract is regarding pool. So it talks about the cleaners, the automatic pool cleaners, the pool nets, the pool covers, all those things that are really can walk off with, that I would consider personal property before, is now included as part of the property that's staying. Light bulbs, including smart bulbs, are all included. So they made some changes to reflect new technology, and again, anything can be asked to stay in the property, as well as the seller can negotiate for things that are fixtures to go with the property, but it needs to be agreed upon in writing on that. So similar to what we had before, which is fixtures and personal property, what stays and what goes. If there's any concerns or questions, it needs to be put in the contract. Okay. Other things like security systems, the software, the home automation, the smart home features, electronic devices, anything like that, except that if it's if I have a system that I control through my iPad, the iPad's not included in that, but the system is. So you might have to get in paragraph 5, the buyer may have to get another iPad or some sort of device to work those features in the home. Paragraph 6 talks about a lease or lien product, and most of those are, for example, the solar. And it's not cheap. I've sold property where the leased solar system costs more to buy out than it did to, in today's numbers, to install and buy. I think I sold one that the buyout was 35,000. And that was when I put my own solar in my own house for about 22,000. So it cost more to buy out the lease than to keep it there. It was I thought highway robbery, but we were stuck with it and we had to deal with it and how we were going to pay it off, or the buyer was going to take over the lease. Any questions on that? So two things when you go looking, when you show property. First thing I look at is who's occupying the property. And if it's a tenant, there's something, light lights up and says, okay, I got to get information on the tenant. Are they moving prior to close of escrow? Or are they locked in with a lease? Or what's the story? And then right from there, when I see that there's a tenant in there, my mind focuses into, I need to do a tenant occupied property agreement. And that's at the time that I make the offer. So that TOPA comes in for there. And then the other item, that there's a light that goes over my head. If I look at solar on the roof, I need to see whether it's leased or whether it's owned. So those are important aspects just when I'm looking at the house for the first time. Okay, allocation of costs. There are point of sale requirements in in some areas of Silicon Valley. Santa Cruz has a point on sale. Up the peninsula has point of sale. Most to do with the sewer laterals, that there was inspections that need to be done. Right now, Santa Clara County does not have that, but I would imagine that they will at some point. We'll have that sewer lateral come up for inspection. It used to be, well, not used to be. There was movement from the Bay Area air quality to convert every single fireplace into a gas burning fireplace, which was going to cost the average homeowner $5,000 per fireplace in order to sell it was a point of sale requirement that got defeated. And the reason it got defeated was a big factor was the real estate associations and CAR, that we agree that we'd like to have clean air, but then make it for everyone. Just don't penalize the buyers and the sellers. Make everyone do it. And then they backed off on that. So anyway, so that's one of the things to look down the pike for. And also, not to go way off the subject, but there's a movement right now in San Jose that they want to eliminate natural gas and have everyone convert to electric. And what's on the table right now is everyone converting to electric, but a phase in over to by 2030. So pay attention to your to the board announcements that that there's something on the horizon, and people, the city council is going to be voting on it later in the year about natural gas and about converting it to electricity over a certain time frame. Okay. Now there's requirements that the seller has to give to the buyer, and there's statutory and other disclosures, lead-based paint, TDS. Basically, it's all in paragraph 11A. And I want to talk about the transfer disclosure statement. And the transfer disclosure statement is required by law, unless exempt, that the seller needs to disclose all material facts of the property. And basically would it, if it would be detrimental for a buyer to move into a property with knowing these facts. And what's required is that the transfer disclosure statement needs to be completely filled out. And then it needs to be filled out by the seller, signed by the seller's agent, and given to the buyer. And then the buyer has 5 days, once they receive the TDS, to the ability to back out based on there's no explanation. Don't need a requirement in order for the buyer to back out. But two things have to happen. The TDS has to be completed. And in CR's version of a completed TDS, it says that the seller and the seller's agent. The buyer's agent has nothing to do with the completed TDS. However, if you use the PRDS contract, their label of what a completed TDS is different than CAR's. With the PRDS, it is saying that the seller, the seller's agent, and the buyer's agent need to complete and sign before given to a buyer that is a completed TDS. The CAR version, again, is that it's just the seller and the seller's agent. Why is the TDS important? That it's done as quickly as possible? Well, 3 days, 5 days from acceptance, depending on how the TDS is given to the buyer. If it's by email or by mail, it's 5 days from giving it, they have the right to back out. However, if you get the TDS in advance with the disclosure package, then the buyer waives that 3 or 5 day right to get out of the contract because they were given it before the offer was made. What happens if there's an event that all of a sudden makes something an addition to the TDS? If there's an event that takes place or something that happens, say a fire, say a murder on the street, say a car crashes into the house, are those material facts?
Yes.
Seller needs to disclose that to the buyer. What happens if the buyer discovers a material fact? Does the seller need to complete a new TDS?
No.
That wasn't very strong.
Because
you
I know that they can back out if they find a material fact that was not disclosed.
Well, to answer my question, you are correct. That if the buyer discovers something that is a material fact, it does not constitute the seller being required to give a new TDS. So the answer is no. For example, if the buyer gets the TDS and then hires another inspection and the inspector uncovers something, since it was the buyer that discovered it, the seller's not obligated to give a TDS. Do you guys understand that?
Mike, I have a question.
Yes.
So this only applies to inside the property. So like, for example, a death on the property. Is it anywhere on the property or only inside the
No.
house?
Anywhere on the property. It's the
Okay.
property that we're talking about. It's not
Okay.
inside the house.
Okay,
So if someone was murdered in the backyard, that's in the property.
okay.
Okay, so let me give you an example of what happened to one of our deals out of the, I'm going to say Gateway office. A buyer was looking at properties with our agent, and crime was really important to this buyer. He would look in the San Jose police website every day to see what was going on with crime. They enter into a contract, buy a condo or townhouse in this complex, and he's searching around and there's no crime nearby. And he had 10-day contingency to conduct all his investigations. Day 10 comes and he needs to remove his contingency. So he removes his contingency. The next day gets on the website and the police update the website and show 3 crimes that took place the day before and the day before that. Now, it wasn't in the complex. It was down the street, quarter mile away, but that scared the buyer. And he called our agent and said, I want out. There's some crimes that took place and get me out of the deal. Well, in this case, the seller was out-of-state seller. He didn't know about the crimes. He didn't know about them, so he didn't disclose them because he didn't know. So there was no TDS needed from on part of the seller, because again, the buyer discovered it, not the seller. Now, if the seller discovered it, that would constitute a new TDS with new material facts, and the buyer would be able to back out. However, since the buyer discovered it, there was no TDS update needed. And the seller said, hey, I want you to go through with this deal. And it was a $20,000 deposit. And what happened was the seller was adamant, saying, look, I didn't discover this. You removed all your contingencies. I want, and they removed them the day before. I want you to proceed with this deal, or it's going to be, you're in breach of contract. So what wound up happening was the $20,000 deposit, the buyer said, take 10, I want 10, I don't want to buy this house. And that's what happened. So it's important to know that if the seller knows about something, he needs to disclose it in an amended TDS or a new TDS. If the buyer finds out about it, the seller's not obligated to conduct a new TDS. Okay, you guys get that?
Yes.
Okay, all right. With that being said, the TDS is a pretty powerful tool in the buyer's conducting the sale of the home. So what's important for both the buyer and the seller's agents is to make sure that the TDS is complete and that there's no blanks. If there are blanks, you need to get the seller or the seller's agent, if you're a buyer, to make sure that it's completed. Okay? All right, moving on. Lead disclosures, that's a mandatory disclosure that cannot be waived. Home fire hardening disclosure and advisory. If a property is in a high or very high hazard severity zone and the TDS is used in the sale. So in other words, if it's a probate, there's no home fire hardening disclosure and advisory needed. But if there's a transaction where there's a TDS and they're located in a high or very high fire hazard zone, then you need to have this form, home fire hardening disclosure, signed by the seller and signed by the buyer. Same thing with the defensible space disclosure and addendum, same thing. Again, if there's a TDS involved and they're in the high fire area, you need to have those forms. Any question on that? What's confusing is, and it's getting better, is what jurisdiction does the house have? Whose jurisdiction is it? in the Santa Cruz Mountains? Is it Los Gatos Fire? Is it Santa Cruz Fire? Is it Cal Fire? Whatever it is, that's what we need to work on, making sure who's got the responsibility for that. Okay. You can't waive the lead-based paint disclosure. Return of signed copies, that's okay. Termination rights, anything that is mailed or delivered by mail, such as the post office, or they still consider email a type of mail. So the 5 days for delivery of the TDS, the buyer has the right to back out. If you give them in person, it's 3 days. Okay, so emails are considered mailing, and that's 5 days. Withholding taxes, that's called the FERPTA. And the FERPTA is that the US government or the state want to make sure that their taxes that the seller is getting, the profits that the seller is getting, that they're going to pay their fair share of the taxes with the sale. And they put the burden on the real estate agent and the title and escrow company. So what used to be that we had to get the FERPTA, we don't need to get the FERPTA anymore, but we need to get the substitute form from the title and escrow saying that they got the FERPTA. And if that's the case, we're totally okay with it. Or else we have to get the FERPTA, which I don't want you guys to get, because we're collecting social security numbers, and then we get into the hassle of security on a part of our clients with social security numbers. So this withholding taxes, we just need to make sure that the title company gives us the qualified substitute form, and that relieves our responsibility of making sure that the seller has given the requirements that the US government puts on us. Okay. Megan's Law, that is, again, we need to supply the information to our buyer and let our sellers know about it. It's not our job to go investigate Megan's Law. That's a website that shows all the sexual predators in the area, and it's not our job to investigate. It's our job to make sure the buyer has the information for them to investigate that and making sure. What I don't like about Megan's Law is that there could be people on the website that basically they could have been 17 or 18. It could have had a 16 or 17-year-old girlfriend, and one of the parents turned them in for sexual predator, and this guy could have it on all his life for something like that, versus someone that's really a deviant and needs to be taken care of, that might have molested a whole bunch of kids, is on that same list. So I wish they did some adjustments to it, but the important thing is that we let our buyers know that they can investigate and see in the neighborhood before they buy. We give them that website. Paragraph J talks about, you guys remember San Bruno? We had that big explosion, and it was the high transmission lines of gas pipelines that PG&E had. Well, they're all over here. And paragraph J refers to what the natural hazard disclosure statement will identify within a quarter-mile radius of an existing high transmission line. It won't point out exactly where it is, but it'll say whether the property is or not within the a quarter of a mile of the transmission line. I lost a transaction in Santa Clara because there's a part of the high transmission line that goes down Lawrence Expressway. And it was within a quarter mile radius of where this thing is at. So a buyer didn't they wanted to back out, and for good reason they did. That wasn't the reason why they backed out. They got cold feet, but they used that as part of their excuse, which at that time there were contingencies. Okay, let's talk about, let's wrap this up. I got 2:45. We're gonna stop right now. Let's finish this. Actually, let's finish this page 8, and then we'll call it a day, and then we have time for some questions and answers. Okay, condominium plan unit development disclosures. This is what you would call the homeowners disclosures. Part of the disclosures include minutes, the financials, the budget, everything about you can read it in paragraph 2, all the items that are associated with the HOA. My favorite is look at the minutes, because everything comes out in the minutes, whether there's a insurance issue, whether there was someone is suing them, any break-ins, along those lines are pretty much found in minutes for a lot of these complexes. But it's important that the seller gives all the full disclosures to the buyer, and buyer reviews them. Because remember, when you buy a condo or a townhouse, what are you also buying? You're buying the HOA. And if the HOA is not properly funded, you could pay me now or pay me later. If they're not funded for a roof replacement, and you know the roof replacement's going to happen in the next 5 years, and they have zero money collected, where do you think they're going to get this money from? They're going to do, eventually they're going to do a special assessment on the existing owners. So it's important to look at the financials, look at everything about the HOA, because when you buy a condo that is underfunded, maybe your value of that condo is worth less. So take in and make sure that your buyer goes in with their eyes wide open for HOA documents. And L is what you get from property ID or disclosure source, or along those lines. You'll see whether it's an earthquake zone, a flood zone, geographic hazard zone, whether it's in a high transmission, a quarter mile high transmission pipeline, things like that. So that's an important, it's really a cheap a report that the seller gets for the buyer, and it relieves the seller of the obligation of disclosing all those things in the report if they don't know them. So let's leave off at that. We'll start tomorrow at page 9. Any questions that we went over? Anything that you guys have that we need to go over? Are we all set? Okay, we're going to start off at page 9 tomorrow, 1 o'clock, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, guys, take care.
Thank you.